where both ruthlessness and kindness are part of the way of the sage. Heaven and earth are not humanistic. They regard myriad beings as straw dogs. Sages are not humanistic. They regard people as straw dogs, wrote the philosopher of the Tao Te Ching. A horrified Western sinologist working in the 1950s, shortly after the truce in Korea, wrote that this passage had unleashed a monster. But to a Taoist, this statement does not represent inhumanity, but an exercise in objectivity, similar to Buddhist exercises in impersonality. In modern terms, this sort of statement is no different from that of a psychologist or sociologist making the observation that the attitudes, thoughts, and expectations of entire nations are not arrived at purely by a multitude of independent rational decisions, but largely under the influence of environmental factors beyond the control of the individual or even the community. As Sun Tzu's classic attests, the place of such an observation in the art of war is not to cultivate a callous or bloodthirsty attitude, but to understand the power of mass psychology. Understanding how people can be manipulated through emotions, for example, is as useful for those who wish to avoid this as it is for those who wish to practice it. Seen in this light, the art of war is no more a call to arms than a study on conditioning is a recommendation for slavery. By so thoroughly analyzing the political, psychological, and material factors involved in conflict, Sun Tzu's professed aim was not to encourage warfare, but to minimize and curtail it. An impersonal view of humanity as not the master of its own fate may be necessary to liberate a warrior from emotional entanglements that might precipitate irrational approaches to conflict. But it is not, in the Taoist scheme of things, held to justify destructive behavior. The counterbalance to this view is also found in the Tao Te Ching, prefiguring Sun Tzu's teachings in the art of war. I have three treasures that I keep and prize. One is kindness, second is frugality, and third is not presuming to take precedence over others. By kindness, one can be brave, by frugality, one can reach out, and by not presuming to take precedence, one can survive effectively. If one gives up kindness and courage, gives up frugality and breadth, and gives up humility for aggressiveness, one will die. The exercise of kindness in battle leads to victory. The exercise of kindness in defense leads to security. In his classic Master Sun likens military action to a fire, which burns itself out if not stopped. And if his strategy of success without conflict was not always attainable, his strategy of hyper-efficiency could at least minimize senseless violence and destruction. In Taoist terms, success is often gained by not doing, and the strategy of the art of war is as much in knowing what not to do and when not to do it as it is in knowing what to do and when to do it. The art of not doing, which includes the unobtrusiveness, unknowability, and ungraspability at the core of esoteric Asian martial arts, belongs to the branch of Taoism known as the science of essence. The arts of doing, which include the external techniques of both cultural and martial arts, belong to the branch of Taoism known as the science of life. The science of essence has to do with state of mind. The science of life has to do with use of energy. Like a classic Taoist text, it is in true balance of these two that the art of war is most completely understood. In more modern times, the definitive Taoist statement on this subject is immortalized in Journey to the West, Shiyuqi Shioji, one of the four extraordinary books of the Ming Dynasty, 1368 to 1644. Drawing on earlier Taoist sources from wartime China under the duress of Mongol invasions, this remarkable novel is a classic representation of the result of what in Taoist terms would be called studying the science of life, without the science of essence, material development without corresponding psychological development, or in Sun Tzu's terms, having force without intelligence. The central figure of this novel is a magical monkey who founds a monkey civilization and becomes its leader by establishing a territory for the monkeys. Subsequently, the Monkey King overcomes a devil confusing the world and steals the devil's sword. Returning to his own land with the devil's sword, the Monkey King takes up the practice of swordsmanship. He even teaches his monkey subjects to make toy weapons and regalia to play at war. Unfortunately, though ruler of a nation, the martial Monkey King is not yet ruler of himself. In eminently logical backward reasoning, the monkey reflects that if neighboring nations note the monkey's play, they might assume the monkeys were preparing for war. In that case, they might therefore take preemptive action against the monkeys, who would then be faced with real warfare armed only with toy weapons. Thus, the Monkey King thoughtfully initiates the arms race, ordering preemptive stockpiling of real weapons. If it seems disconcerting to read a 13th century description of 20th century politics, it may be no less so to read a book as old as the Bible describing tactics in use today, not only by guerrilla warriors, but by influential politicians and corporate executives. Following the disillusionist posture of the Tao Te Ching and the art of war, the story of the Monkey King also prefigures a major movement in modern scientific thought, following the climax of the Western divorce of religion and science centuries ago. The Monkey King in the story exercised power without wisdom, disrupting the natural order and generally raising hell until he ran into the limits of matter, where he was finally trapped. There he lost the excitement of impulsive enthusiasm, and he was eventually released to seek the science of essence under the strict condition that his knowledge and power were to be controlled by compassion, the expression of wisdom and unity of being. The monkey's downfall finally comes about when he meets Buddha, whom the Taoist celestial immortals summoned to deal with the intractable beast. The immortals had attempted to cook him in the cauldron of the 8 trigrams, that is, to put him through the training of spiritual alchemy based on the Taoist I Ching. But he had jumped out still unrefined. Buddha conquers the monkey's pride by demonstrating the insuperable law of universal relativity, and has him imprisoned in the mountain of the 5 elements, the world of matter and energy, where he suffers the results of his arrogant antics. After 500 years, at length Kuan Yin, the trans-historical Buddhist saint traditionally honored as the personification of universal compassion, shows up at the prison of the now repentant monkey and recites this telling verse. Too bad the magic monkey didn't serve the public, as he madly flaunted heroics in days of yore. With a cheating heart, he made havoc in the gathering of immortals. With grandiose gall, he went for his ego to the heaven of happiness. Among 100,000 troops, none could oppose him. In the highest heavens above, he had a threatening presence. But since he was stymied on meeting our Buddha, when will he ever reach out and show his achievements again? Now the monkey pleads with the saint for his release. The saint grants this on the condition that the monkey devote himself to the quest for higher enlightenment, not only for himself, but for society at large. Finally, before letting the monkey go to set out on the long road ahead, as a precaution, the saint places a ring around the monkey's head, a ring that will tighten and cause the monkey severe pain whenever a certain spell invoking compassion is said in response to any new misbehavior on the part of the monkey. The art of war has been known for 100 generations as the foremost classic of strategy, but perhaps its greatest wizardry lies in the ring of compassion that Master Sun slips over the head of every warrior who tries to use this book. And as history shows, the magic spell that tightens its grip is chanted whenever a warrior forgets the ring. The structure and content of the art of war. The art of war, permeated with the philosophical and political thought of the Tao Te Ching, also resembles the great Taoist classic in that it is largely composed of a collection of aphorisms commonly attributed to a shadowy, semi-legendary author. Certain Taoists regard the Tao Te Ching to be a transmission of ancient lore compiled and elaborated by its author, rather than a completely original work, and the same may very well be true of the art of war. In any case, both classics share the general pattern of central themes recurring throughout the text in different contexts. The first book of the Art of War is devoted to the importance of strategy. As the classic I Ching says, leaders plan in the beginning when they do things, and leaders consider problems and prevent them. In terms of military operations, the Art of War brings up 5 things that are to be assessed before undertaking any action: the way, the weather, the terrain, the military leadership, and discipline. In this context, the Wei Tao has to do with civil leadership, or rather the relationship between political leadership and the populace. In both Taoist and Confucian parlance, a righteous government is described as imbued with the Ka,